We just got another loud recession warning, and this one from consumers themselves. In the latest data from the Federal Reserve, Americans ominously put away their credit cards. The seasonally adjusted aggregate balance for revolving credit declined. In fact, that's not the first one. It was the second time in 3 months. And really going back to March, over the last 6 months, credit card use has fallen way off. That's something that happens in a recession. It's not really about spending either. Falling credit card use doesn't necessarily mean a huge direct impact on spending. Instead, it tells us something vastly more important. In the same way consumer confidence doesn't really relate to spending plans, revolving consumer credit isn't about that either. Both of them are instead drawn from perceptions of the state of the economy, in particular the labor market. Unlike consumer confidence, though, consumer credit goes beyond consumers just saying they're downbeat. With falling credit card balances, they feel strongly enough to act on those perceptions. That's why we see falling usage rates and balances during the first stages of recession. People wisely put away their cards, or at least enough people do, when they're faced with reduced job prospects, fewer hours available for work, or even just the hint of layoffs. With no one hiring, the idea of being let go becomes absolutely terrifying. And confronting those possibilities, consumers keep the credit card use to the absolute minimum. In other words, revolving credit is itself a reflection of jobs. And that's why it correlates very strongly with the unemployment rate, as it has again over the last year. Basically, the latest update from the Fed on consumer credit adds more confirmation to the growing pile of evidence showing the economy is exhibiting recession symptoms, the labor market most of all. While everyone is still in the afterglow, the euphoria from the September payroll number, the actual September payroll report, the vast majority of it, had far more in common with what we're seeing in consumer credit and a whole bunch of other data than the headline number that comes out and gets everybody excited. To begin with, we've been here before, not that long ago. Remember March, or actually early April? The March payroll number came out and it was huge. It was a blowout. It confirmed that there would be no landing in the economy, no trouble to worry anyone. The Federal Reserve won't even need to cut rates. Back on April 5th, when the number came out, this is how ABC described it. A Blockbuster jobs report on Friday delivered the latest sign of strong U.S. economic performance, defying the lukewarm feelings held by many Americans, some experts told ABC News. And there it is. Americans were downbeat back in March, and don't those idiots know that the payroll number was really strong, that the labor market is exceptional, there's lots of hiring going on? It conflicted with all of the other evidence that we got in the form of consumer confidence and a whole bunch of others from the market saying the payroll number was an illusion, which is exactly what it proved to be. But that's never how it's taken. Continuing with ABC. Employers hired 303,000 workers last month, blowing past economists' expectations of just 214,000 jobs. The unemployment rate held steady at 3.8%, hovering near a 50-year low. So everything looked terrific. Why is everybody so downbeat? The hiring far surpassed the average number of jobs added each month over the previous year, suggesting an acceleration in performance for one of the key metrics used to assess the nation's economic health. And of course, as we know now, that didn't happen. It was just a 1-month anomaly. Keep this in mind. This morning's blowout jobs numbers show that the economy isn't showing any signs of slowing down. It actually was showing many signs of slowing down. You just choose to ignore them in favor of one number that has a very tortured history. First of all, during inflection periods that we already know is overstating the jobs market, and also has the habit to do this every few months. It'll look weak for a couple months, confirming what all the other data says, and then it will surge seemingly out of nowhere, and everybody will say, all clear, everything's just fine, only for it to fall off yet again, confirming what all the underlying data has been telling us all along. When you get into the jobs number, as I said, it looks more like what we're seeing from everything else than the occasional blowout headline. That March headline payroll report proved to be nothing more than the latest illusion. Again, keep this in mind about the September jobs number. As it has turned out, they were not lukewarm feelings on the economy or the marketplace. It was not a vibe session. Americans have picked up on the economy's transformation from the supply shock downside to the full supply shock downside. And it happened consistently in all the data around March and April. And that's exactly what we see in consumer credit and consumer confidence. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, the leading economic indicator and the economic indicators in Japan, this is a global phenomenon. It wasn't a strong labor market. It was a 1 month anomaly that looked strong to certain people who already have that predisposed position. But most regular Americans couldn't care about the payroll number. They're more concerned about what they perceive of actual payroll and labor market strength. So like consumer confidence, if they see strength, they're going to use their credit cards. It's risk-taking behavior that actually is consistent with how everything is going along in the real economy. If they're perceiving a slowdown in hours, a slowdown in hiring, let alone a hiring freeze, maybe even the prospect of layoffs, like I said in the introduction, quite naturally, they put away their credit cards and spend less, use them less, borrow less. In the latest consumer credit report from the Federal Reserve for the month of August 2024, what we saw is a slowdown in total consumer credit, which included an unhealthy contribution from the federal government in the form of installment credit or non-revolving credit. But what we're focused on here is the revolving side, because that is very highly correlated with other cyclical indicators, especially unemployment, because that's the connection that we're making. When consumers as workers perceive shifts in unemployment that are substantial and likely to be prolonged and stick around, it alters their behavior. Not only do they tell consumer confidence researchers and surveyors that they're more downbeat than they used to be, this lukewarmness that ABC was talking about, they act on those perceptions. They put away their credit cards out of abundance of caution, if not more than that. And when they encounter such degrees of uncertainty, call it uncertainty in the jobs market, not only do some of them end up borrowing less, some consumers actually pay down the balances that they've owed, which is, again, prudent behavior. At the same time, the banking system. Banks are less likely to raise credit card balances when the fundamental conditions in the real labor market, because they're observing down close on the ground all of the key metrics, whether it be incomes or jobs or anything else. So they're less likely to raise credit lines, and they're less likely to give out new cards to lower quality borrowers. So what we see in August is that the seasonally adjusted aggregate balance of revolving credit declined by $1.35 billion. And remember, these figures are revised. And I went over this a couple months ago, and the figures have been revised since then. And what that means is that that's the largest decline in revolving credit in any single monthly balance since 2021. But it wasn't just the August decline. It followed a small decline in the month of June. So over the last 6 months, what you're seeing is credit card behavior and usage behavior has changed radically. Americans were okay with the labor market and the economy, even though they were pressured by rising consumer prices and lost purchasing power. And some of that was out of need and necessity to make up some of the difference. But up until March, they were at least using their credit card. Credit card use was slowing down, but as you can see, it completely changed behavior once again, March and April. It's not just consistent behavior that we see in past cycles. It's consistent with everything else that keeps screaming. March and April, major inflection in the U.S. in the labor market. Here's one more piece of confirmation. So that puts the 6-month average at just $3.07 billion per month, which is equivalent in recession periods to June of 2008, for example, or July and August of 2001, both of those in the thick of those recession periods, whether it be 2008's Great Not Recession or July and August 2001, which was in the middle of the dot-com recession. On a year-over-year basis, it sounds like revolving credit is doing really well. It's up 5.4% year-over-year, but you can see that's slowing way down from where consumer credit had been, the rate at consumer credit had been rising before. And 5.4%, that's still equivalent to August of 2008 or November 2001 at the tail end of the dot-com recession. So in some ways, this is a coincident to even lagging signal that consumers are giving us about their perception of the job market. When they see prospects go down, when they see hiring freeze, as we're observing now, they still spend as much as they can, and it's only out of an overabundance of caution or being forced to do they finally put away their cards. And when they do that, they also do other things that lead to further parts of the vicious recession cycle. Given all that, that's why there's such a close and repeated correlation with the unemployment rate, the U3. Now, the usage of credit cards and the growth rate in credit cards, and I'm showing them on an inverse scale here, which means that as credit card use slows down and even in some cases contracts, that goes up on the chart, which is consistent with a rising unemployment rate. The credit card statistics don't tell us what the unemployment rate should be. It's not a one-to-one relationship. Instead, what it tells us is that when credit card use slows down and potentially falls off as much as it has and over a sustained period, that it's very likely it's due to the fact that actual unemployment in the labor market is rising. And so we expect that the unemployment rate over time will be rising as well. We don't know exactly what that means as far as what level unemployment, quote unquote, should be, just that it is more likely to be going in the wrong direction than to be reflecting some strong labor market that only exists in the form of a payroll report every once in a while that blows away expectations. And unlike the September payroll figure, there's a whole wealth of corroboration for what we're seeing from the credit card statistics, from consumer confidence, starting with JOLTS. I've talked about this before, and it's worth reiterating because the JOLTS data has a much better correlation in reality than certainly the establishment survey during these periods. In other words, the JOLTS data showed a sharp slowdown in hiring even before we got to this year, and then an accelerated slowdown, especially over the last several months. Again, the JOLTS data, like consumer credit, only goes through August, but in the same 3 months where we're seeing credit card use fall off and actually decline in 2 out of those 3 months, we see hiring down at firmly recession territory. Hiring in the month of August was nearly as bad as it had been at that shocking June low, which means over the last 3 months of the JOLTS data for hiring, it very much reflects what would be behind what we're seeing in consumer credit. And it's not just that either, also from JOLTS, the quits level, which suggests very strongly that Americans are perceiving a lack of opportunity in the labor market, in jobs, in employment, and therefore they are choosing not only to put their credit cards away, but also to stay with the job that they have. They're not voluntarily quitting the positions that they have, understanding that there's likely no benefit to doing so. There's nobody out there hiring. And this is despite the fact that the rest of the CES data, or the establishment survey data, was a lot like everything we're seeing here, especially hours. So as we see hours get trimmed, Americans are sticking where they are anyway, whether they like it or not, because they know there's no other place to go. And that was the most striking aspect of the payroll report. While everybody fixated on the huge headline, it was completely belied and betrayed by the hours data. The hours index was flat over the last 6 months. 6 months, these same 6 months, hours have stopped rising, which means American employers are, if they're adding workers, that means they're adding workers and not working the ones that they have as much as they had before per worker. As a result, the average work week fell in September all the way back to 34.2 hours, which is another very clear recession signal. And it's not only a clear recession signal and it's on its own right, it's also a recession signal that is consistent and corresponding with everything else that we're talking about here. Lack of hiring, consumer confidence falling off, and credit cards use declining. It's understandable why people fixate instead on layoffs, because we associate recession with job cuts. And it's only because we don't realize that we're in recession during the early stages where there aren't as many or even any job cuts. But as I've shown before, and a lot of academic data has proven and has established, it's not actually layoffs and firing that triggers a recession. It is this lack of hiring that we see confirmed in all of this other data, except for the one payroll report or the occasional payroll report like March or September. Instead, the lack of hiring shows exactly what we're seeing in the behavior of consumers as well as the behavior of employers. Why else are they trimming hours? Why else are they choosing not to hire new employees? Because the economy isn't just slowing down, it is actively falling. They're being pressured by the downturn into taking proactive measures to control their costs. And Americans are picking up on that control. They're picking up on the weakness in the labor market and it's changing their behavior. Here's another data source that goes along with it. Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. They said U.S. employers announced 403,891 hiring plans in September 2024, with 401,850 of those coming from seasonal employers, both in retail and transportation warehousing. This is down 32% from the 590,353 hiring plans announced in September of last year, 2023. Of the September 2023 hiring plans, most of those were seasonal too. For the year, employers have announced plans to add just 483,590 jobs, down 33% from the 726,333 announced hiring plans through September 2023. These are the lowest year-to-date hiring plans since 2011, when employers plan to add just 300,000 jobs through September. So what we're seeing is exactly consistent with everything else. According to Challenger Gray and Christmas, no one is hiring. According to consumers who are putting away their credit cards, no one is hiring. Their hours are getting cut. They're not quitting their jobs because they have to sit there and take it. And so it's altering their behavior in a way that's consistent with past recession cycles. And that's just what they told the Conference Board late in September. According to the Conference Board, consumers' assessments of current business conditions turned negative, while views of the current labor market situation softened further. Consumers were also more pessimistic about future labor market conditions and less positive about future business conditions and future income. The deterioration across the Conference Board index's main components likely reflected consumers' concerns about the labor market and reactions to fewer hours, slower payroll increases, and fewer job openings, actual demand for labor. And forget the payroll number. It is highly misleading at inflection points. It's overstated. We know that already, QCEW. And more than that, it has this tendency to show up with a huge number seemingly out of nowhere, because it is out of nowhere. It is completely out of place. It's out of the place with its own data in its own series, as the hours number and others from the payroll report actually showed. So there are a number of reasons why revolving consumer credit is highly and inversely correlated with the economy. Americans put away their cards when they perceive fewer job opportunities, problems at their workplace, as well as potential and even hints of layoffs yet to come. The data, all of it apart from the establishment survey headline, it's absolutely consistent with what we're seeing in credit card use. There's no hiring. There are fewer hours. And you know there's growing worry because there's likely talk about layoffs. Well, everyone can get excited about one monthly payroll report, and they do every time one comes up, like in March. The underlying fundamentals show why that is likely to be, and almost certainly going to be, a 1 month aberration. We are getting recession signals from all over the place. The fact that it isn't in headline payrolls isn't actually unusual. This happens every cycle too. So credit card usage, falling credit card usage, is another consistent, validated recession warning. I talked about yesterday, Japan and its leading economic indicator, and a whole bunch of other data from Japan that is globally synchronized with the fall off, and especially the timing. That's in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you. Eurodollar University members and subscribers, still fall sale going on. Check that out. And until next time, take care.